Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Andrew Huberman, professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. Today, I want to talk about a powerful but often overlooked concept. Stay silent, everything will come naturally. This isn't about passivity. This is about harnessing the neurobiology of restraint, of focus, of stillness to unlock a more powerful, more deliberate version of yourself. In a world driven by constant stimulation, relentless notifications, and external validation loops, silence becomes a neurological superpower. When we stay silent, internally and externally, we allow certain key systems in the brain to reorganize and reveal the very answers we're seeking from the outside. Let's go into the 8 core neuropsychological principles that support this. When we talk about staying silent, both externally and internally, we're not just referring to the absence of speech or sound. We're referring to a specific brain state that activates when we are not focused on the outside world. This state is governed by a system called the default mode network, or DMN for short. The DMN includes several key brain regions: the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus, among others. These regions light up when you're in a restful, introspective state, such as daydreaming, meditating, or engaging in deep, quiet thought. Now, here's what's fascinating. The DMN is responsible for some of the most important internal processes that define human intelligence and self-awareness. When you're constantly reacting, talking, scrolling, engaging, your brain is focused outward on tasks, but when you go silent, the DMN allows the brain to begin integrating what you've learned. This is when random thoughts and experiences start to make connections. It's when new ideas are formed. Creativity doesn't happen during the noise. It emerges in the quiet after. Think about when you have your best ideas in the shower, on a walk, just before sleep. That's your DMN doing its best work. It's a neural synthesis engine. The DMN is also responsible for mental time travel, thinking about the past, visualizing the future, and forming a sense of self. When you allow yourself moments of silence, the DMN enables you to see your behavior, goals, and emotions from a zoomed-out perspective. And this gives rise to insight, not information, but self-knowing. Insight is what lets you pivot, change, and grow, but it can't arise when the brain is overstimulated. Silence unlocks this process. In Western culture, we're obsessed with doing, but neuroscience shows us that some of the most productive brain states happen when we are apparently doing nothing, when we are still, quiet, and not engaging in a task. This is where true strategy, reflection, and intuition are born. So when we say stay silent, everything will come naturally, we're not being poetic. We're talking about a very real biological shift that allows you to access deeper cognitive power. The DMN is like the brain's backstage, and silence is the moment the curtain drops, letting the crew do their best work. One of the most profound benefits of staying silent is how it impacts your dopamine system, and ultimately your ability to stay motivated, focused, and grounded over the long term. To understand this, let's break down how dopamine works. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical. That's not quite accurate. Dopamine is about motivation and pursuit. It's what gives you energy to go after things, goals, tasks, people, validation. Every time you get a notification, a like, a new message, your brain gets a dopamine hit. It feels good in the moment, but here's the problem. It raises your baseline. Your brain begins to expect frequent stimulation, and when that stimulation isn't there, you feel bored, anxious, unmotivated. Staying silent mentally and behaviorally helps to recalibrate your dopamine system. When you practice being silent, especially when you resist the urge to speak, react, or seek stimulation, you are training your prefrontal cortex to exert top-down control over the dopamine system. This is powerful. Why? Because it builds delayed gratification, the ability to pursue long-term goals without needing constant rewards. This is the very trait that separates high performers from everyone else. The most successful people in any field are not the most talented. They are often the ones who can tolerate boredom, repetition, and low stimulation phases of a process without quitting. Silence then becomes a mental gym for strengthening this. When you reduce your reliance on dopamine-driven behaviors like oversharing, over-explaining, or constantly seeking validation, your brain becomes more resilient. You start to generate dopamine from internal sources, a sense of progress, alignment, calm. This shift is huge because now your sense of fulfillment isn't dictated by your environment. It's internal, controlled, self-generated. Research also shows that mindfulness and meditative silence increase the sensitivity of dopamine receptors over time. That means when you do get rewards, they feel more meaningful. You no longer need a flood, a drop will do. That's efficiency. That's balance. The strongest nervous systems aren't those chasing the loudest highs. They're the ones steady enough to hold silence and still find satisfaction. So when we say stay silent, everything will come naturally, we're also talking about dopaminergic reprogramming. You're not numbing yourself, you're sharpening your drive. You're not checking out, you're tuning in to a deeper, more stable source of energy that doesn't burn out. In today's world, your nervous system is under constant threat activation, not from wild animals, but from emails, deadlines, arguments, overstimulation, and even just overthinking. Every ping, every conversation, every internal monologue, it's all information. And information is energy that the body has to process. But here's where it gets powerful. When you choose stillness and silence, even for a few minutes a day, you shift your body and mind out of fight or flight mode and into rest and regulate mode, parasympathetic. This isn't a nice to have, it's biologically necessary. Your nervous system has two major branches. Sympathetic, alertness, action, reaction, think speeding up. Parasympathetic, recovery, digestion, calm focus, think slowing down. Most people live in a chronically upregulated sympathetic state, always slightly tense, slightly on edge, even when nothing's wrong. That's why burnout isn't just mental, it's physiological. The nervous system never gets a break. But silence, even 5 to 10 minutes of no input, no output, tells the body, you're safe, you don't need to fight, you can recalibrate. One of the fastest ways to access the parasympathetic system is through intentional stillness and nasal breathing. It slows your heart rate, lowers cortisol levels. It sends signals through the vagus nerve, the body's main chill-out pathway, telling every organ to stand down. When you pair silence with stillness, even just sitting quietly, no phone, no movement, you create a neurochemical state of restoration. And in that state, your body repairs, your brain integrates, your stress resets. And when you're constantly in motion, mentally or physically, you confuse adrenaline for clarity. That wired feeling, it tricks you into thinking you're focused, but it's just noise. True clarity emerges in the absence of stimulation. That's why elite performers, from monks to CEOs to athletes, all have some form of stillness practice. It's not laziness, it's nervous system training. Staying silent isn't just about the moment, it's about setting a calm baseline for your nervous system. When your baseline is low and steady, you handle stress better, recover faster, sleep deeper, think clearer, communicate more effectively. Most people try to think their way out of stress, but that doesn't work. You have to regulate your way out. And regulation begins in stillness. So next time you feel overwhelmed, don't look for something to add. Stimulation, conversation, advice. Try subtracting, try silence. Because when the body is still, the mind has space. And when the nervous system is calm, everything else, creativity, memory, intuition, begins to flow naturally. When we talk about silence, we're not just talking about external quiet, we're talking about what happens internally. Because when the world gets loud, your internal chemistry responds. One of the key players here is cortisol, your primary stress hormone. Cortisol isn't bad, it's essential for waking up in the morning, for taking action, for responding to life. But when it's chronically elevated, as it often is in fast-paced, hyperverbal, overstimulated environments, it becomes toxic. And here's the kicker. You don't have to be screaming or panicking for cortisol to rise. Even excessive talking, overthinking, gossiping, or over-explaining can keep you in a low-grade fight-or-flight loop. Silence, on the other hand, cuts that loop. And that's where transformation begins, when cortisol is high. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, your logic, reasoning, and long-term planning center, becomes less effective. Your thoughts become more reactive, emotional, short-sighted. In this state, you're not responding to life, you're reacting to perceived threats. And often, those threats are just noise. Silence is the reset button. It gives the body and brain space to metabolize emotional charge, recalibrate hormonal balance, and return to neutral or even creative flow. We often think of emotional control as a matter of willpower, but in reality, it's neurochemical, it's biological. You don't become less angry by trying harder. You become less angry by creating the conditions in your body and brain that allow for regulation. That means lowering cortisol, activating parasympathetic tone, giving space between stimulus and response. Silence creates that space. Emotional mastery isn't about suppression, it's about space. Space before you respond. Space before you speak. Space before you make that decision you might regret. And that space is trained in silence. When you practice silence daily, whether it's through meditation, journaling, or just unplugging, you strengthen the neural circuitry that controls impulses. Over time, you'll find yourself naturally saying less, listening more, reacting slower, processing deeper. That's not weakness, that's control, that's power. When you return to silence regularly, your brain begins to rewire how it responds to challenges. Instead of firing up the cortisol-laced emotional brain, it engages the executive networks of the prefrontal cortex. You go from being triggered to being aware, from being emotional to being intentional. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your nervous system. And silence strengthens that level. So when you stay silent, you're not avoiding life, you're training for it. You're regulating the chemistry that controls your moods, your mindset, and your next move. If you've ever tried to change a habit, build a new skill, or rewire your mindset, what you're really working with is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself based on experience. But here's what most people don't realize. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen while you're doing the work. It happens after, in the silence, in the pause. At the cellular level, neuroplasticity is the process of forming new synaptic connections, strengthening or weakening existing neural circuits, reassigning networks to new functions. In simpler terms, the brain is always trying to get better at whatever you're doing repeatedly, whether that's focus, anxiety, creativity, or mindless scrolling. The more you reinforce a pattern, the more automatic it becomes. But the solidifying of that pattern, that happens not during action, but during rest. When you practice something, a new behavior, mindset, or even a new belief, your brain creates a temporary map of that activity. But unless you give it time to settle, it fades. This is called neural consolidation, and it happens best when you're not speaking, You're not consuming input. Your brain is in a low stimulation state. In other words, silence is the environment your brain needs to lock in the lesson. Think about it. You don't grow muscle in the gym. You grow muscle after the gym during rest. The brain works the same way. When you're constantly bombarding your brain with noise, podcasts, TikTok, debates, meetings, you don't give it a chance to consolidate what it's learning. You become a collector of information, but not a processor of wisdom. Silence is what turns input into insight. It's the mental sleep that learning needs to stick. Even 30 seconds of quiet reflection after a meaningful experience helps your brain extract and retain the value. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's always looking for patterns in behavior, in relationships, in your environment, but it needs silence to review the data and detect those patterns. This is why moments of stillness, especially after failure, learning, or deep emotional events, often lead to sudden clarity or new understanding. That's neuroplasticity at work. How to use this practically. After a deep work session, close your eyes for 2 minutes, let it integrate. After an emotional conversation, sit silently, let your nervous system reset before reacting. After consuming knowledge, pause, reflect before you add more input. These micro pauses are when your brain actually rewires. Without them, you're just collecting information without transformation. Neuroplasticity is like writing in wet cement. Silence is what lets it dry. So if you're trying to build a better version of yourself, don't just grind. Pause, be still, be quiet. That's where the real change sets in. You've probably felt it before, the presence of someone who says very little but somehow commands attention. They're not loud, they're aware. They read the room without trying. They speak only when it matters. That's not magic. That's mirror neuron function in action. And silence is what refines it. Mirror neurons are specialized brain cells found primarily in the premotor cortex and inferior parietal lobule that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. They're the reason. You wince when someone stubs their toe. You feel someone's joy or pain without them saying a word. You catch someone's mood just by being around them. In short, they're the neurological basis for empathy, intuition, and emotional resonance. When you're constantly talking or thinking about what to say next, you're in your head, not in the moment. Silence, on the other hand, lets you tune in. It shifts you from being reactive to being receptive. And in that receptive mode, your mirror neurons wake up. You start picking up on subtle body language, micro expressions, shifts in tone and energy, what's not being said. This is the beginning of real emotional intelligence. And it's not about forcing it. It comes naturally when your internal noise drops. Humans are deeply social, and whether we realize it or not, we're always scanning each other's nervous systems. When someone is loud, erratic, or emotionally leaky, others feel it in their bodies. But when you are calm, quiet, grounded, you become someone people feel safe around, even if you don't say much. Your silence becomes stability. And in that stability, others begin to open up. This is why some of the most powerful communicators are also the most measured, minimal, and intentional. Beyond empathy, mirror neurons also play a key role in learning by observation. When you're silent, not just in speech, but mentally, your brain absorbs behavior, movement, and even emotional patterns from those around you. That's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who reflect the mindset you want. Your silent, receptive brain is mirroring them all the time. The more you cultivate silence, the more you develop what could be called inner social awareness. It's the ability to sense how others are feeling without them telling you. Know the right time to speak and when not to. Lead without dominating. Influence without forcing. And that's not guesswork, it's your mirror neuron system becoming more efficient. When you stop trying to be heard, you start hearing what others actually need. So if you want deeper relationships, stronger influence, and true social intelligence, start by being quiet enough to observe. Let's start with a truth that neuroscience and ancient wisdom agree on. Your brain knows more than your conscious mind can articulate. We often think of intuition as mystical or irrational. But what we call intuition is actually the result of deep pattern recognition, subconscious processing, and fast neural integration, all operating below the level of your inner narration. And the only way to access that? Silence. The default mode network is the brain system that lights up when you're not actively focused on a task, when you're resting, daydreaming, or reflecting. It's deeply involved in self-awareness, memory integration, emotional processing, future simulation, creative insights. But here's the key. The DMN is strongest when external noise is low. When you're silent, not consuming, not responding, the brain enters its most introspective, integrative state. This is where your deeper knowing comes online. You've likely had moments where you just knew someone was lying without evidence. You sensed a decision was wrong before logic caught up. An idea dropped in, fully formed, while you were on a walk, in the shower, staring out the window. That's intuition, not magic, just compressed experience, subconscious insight, and emotional accuracy delivered without needing words. And it almost always happens in moments of quiet. When your mind is busy, especially with internal narration, like overthinking, rumination, or rehearsing conversations, it's like trying to hear a whisper in a noisy room. Silence is what lowers the volume on mental chatter so that intuitive signals, often quiet, subtle, body-based, can actually come through. You begin to feel
a yes or no in your gut, tension in your chest when something is off, a calm certainty when you're aligned. These aren't random, they're embodied wisdom. And silence is what makes you sensitive enough to detect it. The most successful thinkers, creators, leaders, they all have non-negotiable quiet time. Not because it's trendy, because it's productive in the deepest way. Bill Gates takes think weeks in total isolation. Einstein often credited his breakthroughs to daydreaming and walking. Naval Ravikant, Steve Jobs, and many others emphasized space over grind. Why? Because when you silence the surface, the depths speak. Intuition is intelligence moving faster than reason. Silence lets it reach the surface. So if you want better decisions, clearer direction, and more alignment, stop chasing answers. Be still enough to receive them. When you get quiet, not just externally, but internally, you start noticing how much of your life is driven by external noise. Seeking approval, explaining yourself, looking for advice, opinions, reassurance, feeling the need to prove or defend your choices. But silence pulls you inward. And in that space, you discover something powerful. You already know more than you think. You already have what you need. It's just been drowned out by noise. We often equate confidence with being loud, certain, charismatic, but real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. When you sit with yourself long enough, without distractions, without stimulation, you start to feel your own center. And that's the root of self-sufficiency. It's not about isolation or arrogance. It's about knowing that you can navigate chaos without reacting. You can make decisions without needing consensus. You can move forward even when things are unclear. And silence builds that. Trusting the process doesn't mean giving up. It means you stop trying to force growth and instead you create the conditions for it to unfold. Think of nature. Trees don't rush to grow, they follow the seasons. Rivers don't force their path, they find it over time. Your nervous system, your mind, your evolution, it's the same. Silence is what teaches you patience. Patience is what teaches you trust. When you stay silent, you stop constantly seeking answers, opinions, reaction. Instead, you start listening to your body, your intuition, your environment. This shift is subtle but radical because when you no longer need the world to constantly reflect your worth, you stop chasing. And when you stop chasing, you become magnetic, aligned, grounded. Life will always be unpredictable. Emotions will rise, challenges will come, people will misunderstand you, but silence builds the capacity to remain anchored through all of it. You stop being someone who gets pulled by every wave, every text, every opinion, every mood swing. Instead, you become the one who holds the line, who trusts the season, who waits for clarity to arrive and acts from a place of grounded truth when it does. Silence isn't withdrawal, it's alignment with something deeper than noise. In that silence, you build a relationship with your future self. You realize that everything you're working toward, the insight, the impact, the inner peace, it's already on its way. You just need to stop interrupting the process. So when you stay silent, you're not hiding. You're growing roots, you're regulating your system, you're trusting the unfolding, and most of all, you're becoming someone that doesn't just move with the world, but moves the world. Silence is not the absence of power, it's where power builds. In a world addicted to noise, movement, and performance, your ability to stay still is an act of rebellion. Your ability to stay silent is an act of faith. Faith in your nervous system, faith in timing, faith in the invisible mechanics of transformation that are always unfolding, even when nothing seems to be happening. So stop explaining, stop chasing, stop performing. Be still, be silent, and let the world feel your gravity. Because the more you trust the quiet, the louder your presence becomes.